Hello, this is Georgina Rose, part-time esoteric content creator and part-time Center of Pestilence, and part-time looking for a new intro. And welcome back to the Darling YouTube channel. On this channel, we discuss religion, mysticism, the occult, and everything on the fringe of esoterica. And welcome back to another Occult 101 video. Occult 101 is the flagship series of this channel. It's been going on for over 2 years now, which is insane to say. And basically what I do is I take a broad paradigm, topic, concept within the esoteric world, and I break it down so that, everyone can understand it and have a sort of jumping off point into further research. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about something that I'm kind of surprised I haven't actually made a proper video on. I've made videos related to this, but I've never made a video just on this, and that would be mysticism. So mysticism is probably the form of esoteric spirituality people are most familiar with, right? The term mysticism gets thrown around a lot, but I think a lot of people aren't entirely sure what mysticism actually is and don't really know how to distinguish it from other forms of spiritual praxis or actually doing things. In any spiritual tradition, there is both the exoteric and the esoteric, and these two come together to form the paradigm or the collection of ideas. So the exoteric, sort of like the word exterior, is the outward-facing canon of a religion. It is the stories. It is the main services that people go to. It is the values, the morals, the things that are taught, and the things that you teach externally. Whereas the esoteric, not as good of a reference point. I can't say it matched with internal, but it's not external because it doesn't have the X. Trying my best to make that a little easier to learn, is the interior of a religion. It is that inner part, right? Like, let's say going to church, that would be the exoteric, but when you actually go to church and you see communion or, any sort of miracle within that, that would be the esoteric, right? When you pray, you are sort of dabbling with the esoteric to some extent. All that internal stuff is esoteric. It is the interior. And so mysticism is on the esoteric side. Mysticism relates to experiences. Mysticism there are of course mystic schools within religions, and I want to kind of explain that. So within every religion, there's typically a mystic school, which is a part of that religion that focuses the most on mysticism and emphasizes it the most and contains the most mystic teachings. And this part of that religion tends to be the part that mystics adhere to. Some examples would be Sufism or Kabbalah. As well, like within pagan traditions, there are often sort of esoteric schools or parts of it as well. But mysticism can be applied to really any part of the religion, but they do typically attach to mystic schools. However, some religions do not have distinct mystic schools. They just apply mysticism to everything. Truly, mysticism exists in every religion, and there's really no way to fully separate religion from mysticism because the vast majority of religions began with what is known as unverified personal gnosis, which is a term that I have a kind of not great relationship with. I don't really like it, but basically what it means is a personal experience you have with the divine that you extrapolate from and gain your gnosis or knowledge from. Gnosis is going to be a key idea in mysticism. Gnosticism is when you make knowledge with the divine through direct interaction. So basically UPG is the basis of every religion. Every religion began with someone's personal experience, unless it was made sort of as like an attempt to bridge things. There are a number of traditions that basically began later where it's an attempt to say syncretize a bunch of stuff, but even then a lot of those did have UPG. An example of that would be Thelema. In Thelema, it is a largely syncretic process as it is part of the Victorian occult revival, which is a period of revivalist esoteric movements in the Victorian and Edwardian periods that largely were within the United Kingdom, though some in broader Europe, where they essentially set out to bridge the religions of the world together into one coherent, super religion. And almost all of these traditions contained a very mystic element where all these religions were utilized as tools in order to sort of maximize your spiritual understanding and grow the most as a person. So Thelema, while it is an attempt to do that, there was still UPG involved, right? Aleister Crowley, the sort of founder of Thelema, was in Cairo and did have a specific esoteric mystic experience where he channeled a variety of spirits. So even then, that religion is largely a syncretic process, but there was still that UPG element. Now, I wanted to talk about what distinguishes mysticism from magic, because these terms sometimes get thrown around interchangeably, but they do have different meanings. Now, mysticism, while I have largely been saying it relates to personal experience, mysticism is a type of personal experience. Mysticism has a specific goal. Mysticism has the goal of understanding, knowledge, and closeness to divinity. Largely when you see the term mysticism thrown around, particularly within the Christian mysticism sort of constraint, Mysticism is when you do spiritual things to get closer to God, right? That would be like contemplative prayer, which for those who don't know is where you read a section of a holy text, you think about it, and then you meditate on that. Or it could be getting really deep into prayer to the point where you experience divine ecstasy. Ecstasy in a spiritual context is not the drug. It is not necessarily enjoyment either. It's when you have a very intense experience with the spirit and it overtakes you and you enter a sort of like altered state of consciousness that can seem very aesthetic. That's where the sort of term comes from. That would be mysticism. As well, if you are analyzing a spiritual holy text and working with that text and trying to unlock sort of alternative meanings and complex meanings within it, and then utilizing those meanings for specific spiritual acts, that would fall under mysticism. As well, people who are, quote, devotional polytheists within paganism, which is a sort of term within the pagan world of people who, they use their pagan spirituality as you would see a mainstream religion. A lot of the time, paganism gets lumped in with like magical occult practices. They get thrown together a lot. I think there's a variety of reasons for this, mostly that a lot of these sort of modern magical occult traditions do have pagan polytheistic elements to them is going to be part of it. As well, the fact that the largest pagan sect is Wicca. Love it or hate it, that is the truth right now. And Wicca is a deeply occult magical practice. People really lump paganism and occult traditions together. And that overlap has existed historically, right? Like within Nordic paganism back in the day, there were ideas like Satyr, which is obviously a very mystic occult concept. But there is still like a distinction. And so there are a lot of people, and this was a lot of the pagans historically, like historically not all the pagans were doing, these really complex magical rituals. A lot of them just saw it as their religion, where they are just praying to the gods, giving offerings, and really connected to the gods in a more conventionally religious way. We would call those devotional polytheists. And the spiritual expression that they would connect to would be mysticism, right? There were a lot of cults that existed historically in the pagan world that were deeply mystic. I think immediately to Orphism within the Greek world, right? Orphism was not really using like these spirits and these techniques to like gain stuff. They were more using it to understand the mysteries and get closer to the divine. Now, magic, this term we see thrown around, spelled with a K if you're talking about anything after Aleister Crowley, is the ability to use your will to enact change. So when we're talking about magic, we are explicitly talking about using spirits and using all this stuff to enact change in the material world, right? When you do magic, as Dion Fortune explained, it is the act of going above the material plane, grabbing what is above the material plane and pulling it back and having it enact an effect on the material plane. You are going up to bring down and then enact in the material world. That is the distinction. Once again, magic is not throwing fireballs. I know Hollywood has really gotten us up in arms about that word and gotten us kind of uncomfortable with that word, weird about that word, but really what it is just using this stuff to enact change. Looking back at Christianity, since I mentioned that earlier, I'm going to give an example. Magic within Christianity would be, say, setting up novena candles and using the saints to, say, get money. You see a lot of this in traditions like Santeria. But yeah, that would be magic. Whereas if you were doing contemplative prayer or meditating on the Eucharist after you took it in church, that would be mysticism. And so this distinction does matter and does have an effect. Now, mystic experiences can enact change in your life. They can. Mysticism is not strictly something that doesn't affect the material world, but the goal with mysticism is not to affect the material world. The goal of mysticism is closeness to the Godhead, whereas the goal of magic is that change. They are not necessarily black and white dichotomous categories, right? Like if you have a really profound mystic experience with a spirit, is that probably going to affect your material life? I would say so. But once again, they are distinct, and that's why I really wanted to stress that they are not the same thing. Now I wanted to talk about mystical experiences and what it is like to actually have a mystic experience. Because if you want to engage with mysticism, mysticism is not necessarily something you want to just read about. Of course, many people do. A lot of the mystics of the past have written very beautiful writings about their experiences. A lot of them wrote really long books where they explained how they did what they did and what they saw. Mystical experiences have given us so much, but of course, a lot of people want to experience them. I certainly did, and I have been engaging with mysticism for a long time. I've also noticed that the longer someone is into the occult, the esoteric, the spiritual, whatever you want to call it, the more mystically oriented their personal spiritual practice tends to become. I find when a lot of people get into this stuff, or at least it was the case for me and quite a few people I know, they get into it with a desire to improve their lives and make material change. They get into it with that interest in magic. And then with time, as they experience this stuff more, they connect to spirits, they connect to the gods, they develop a real reverence and devotion. And that is what creates their interest in mysticism. And eventually they do end up doing mysticism. A really good quote about it, and I believe this was from Frater Occult. I might be wrong. I'm maybe quoting that wrong. If I'm wrong, correct me in the comments, I'll pin it. Is mysticism is the child of discipline and devotion. And I think those two words are something you should really hold on to. If you want to engage with mysticism, you need to understand discipline, you need to understand devotion. Discipline is the cornerstone of any successful spiritual practice. Sadly, if you have like a random mystical experience once, which many people do, many people have had very unexplained, weird experiences come out of nowhere, that's really great. But if you want to replicate that and make that something that you are connected to regularly and fully master, you need discipline. To be a good mystic, there are a number of skills you kind of need no matter what tradition you personally consider yourself part of. And that would be meditation. You need to learn how to meditate if you're a spiritualist. Meditation, it's not my favorite thing. I don't love talking about it. It's not something that really gets me excited, but it is so, so important. As well, outside of a mystic framework, meditation has amazing psychological and health benefits for anyone who engages with meditation. But if you're going to be a mystic, it's so important because to understand what is outside of you, you must understand what's within. A key idea in all of esotericism is what is known as above, so below, or the macrocosm and the microcosm. And that is that the big world relates to the small world and vice versa. An easy way to explain this is to look at astrology. I think we all kind of know what astrology is. No matter how you feel about it, we all know what it is, right? The movement of the stars and the planets affects our internal and individual lives. Many people think that's random and arbitrary and doesn't make sense, but what that really comes back to is this argument, as above, so below. The heavens influence the earth. And vice versa applies when we are talking about esoteric practice, right? What we do in our small ritual space impacts the larger world. You'll understand this if you understand the law of correspondence. In a lot of esoteric traditions, to make things happen, you do something that corresponds to the big thing and the big thing happens, right? Like say you're purifying yourself, right? You would use eucalyptus. Eucalyptus is known to correspond to purification. And so when you touch eucalyptus, you are affecting the macrocosm and doing purification. Or if you're talking about specific things, I'm sure we're all familiar with the idea of a puppet, right? The voodoo doll, though that term is a little complicated. I can get into why I don't like that term, but we're just going to use it because it's an example that everyone knows, everyone's familiar with it, right? You poke the voodoo doll and it affects the person the voodoo doll represents, as above, so below. So this principle, if we apply it to mysticism, we understand that what is within our mind affects what is outside of our minds, right? This is all linked. That is also why if you want to get into mysticism, purification is incredibly important. Ritual purification is something that I can't emphasize enough. Every single tradition has their own variants of it. Some more extreme than others, but it's something that all things come back to. Before any large ritual, it is always recommended to purify, to cleanse, and to clear out. This purification is important because when we deal with anything esoteric, we are dealing with things beyond it, and it's important to have a clean space, clean mind, all connects. Clean your room is sadly a metaphysical piece of advice. It actually is. And then once you're purified, you can have the experience itself. So once you've done your purification, your meditation, you're sort of ready to go. But discipline is also important. And another thing that you can use to build discipline is focus. Focus is the enemy of the postmodern world. Our focus is shot. From watching TikToks all day, trust me, I enjoy a few TikToks, they're kind of fun, to our constant overstimulation, we have no focus. Our focus has decreased like crazy over the past few decades. And to have a good mystical experience, you need to focus because you need to be focused on what is happening. And you need to not be, during your mystical experience, thinking about what you're going to go get at Target later that day. You need to be zoned in and have your mind fully attached. As well, another thing to learn is visualization. Visualization is the ability to see with your mind's eye. There are many exercises to learn visualization. One that is brought up a lot is called the countdown exercise, where essentially you close your eyes and you visualize the number 100, and then you visualize it counting down. Like as your brain counts down, you see it written countdown. You visualize this in your head. There's also one that I remember was going around a lot when I was a new occultist, where you visualize a spear and then you rotate it and you see all the sides. This all sounds very boring, I know, but it will build these techniques to make these spiritual experiences much stronger and more powerful. To be a mystic is to learn the boring stuff. It's not flashy. Mysticism largely isn't flashy, But once you get the not flashy stuff down, then you're going to have these really profound experiences that will give you that satisfaction, but you have to work towards it. It doesn't just happen. Another one would be devotion. Mystic practices are not practices that you view as an exchange. I call this, there's this idea that a lot of, especially people who are really occult oriented, have of what I like to call, and no one will call it themselves, but it's the truth, the spiritual ATM, right? You put in ritual, you put in incense, you get thing, right? A lot of occultists feel this way. They're like, oh, if I burn down candle, I get thing. It's just a trade. Mysticism is not through a trading framework. You do not trade when you're doing mysticism. You are fully devoting yourself to the spirit, and you're not necessarily expecting a return. You're not doing this to get a thing. You are doing this to gain closeness. You are no longer using spirituality to just get things in the material world, but to get something internal. And that is oftentimes more valuable, because the goal of all of spirituality is not to just get shit. Maybe it is for you. I'm not going to judge you, that's your choice. But for many people, the goal is things like true will, to accomplish a great work, connection to God, theosis, all these really complex things. And after a certain point, you do need to understand a bit about devotion, prayer, offerings. And the last thing is consistency. With mysticism, you need to be consistent. I don't think you need to do like 10 hours of ritual a day or something insane. I don't think you need to meditate for 20 hours a day and live off rainwater and no, that's ridiculous. I don't think that. But you do need a level of consistency to have these experiences. You need to be working on it. You need to be thinking about it. You need to have a daily practice. I cannot stress enough the value of a daily practice, because that consistency will give you that discipline and will give you the stronger experience. It's important to have all these things together so that you can add it all up and build up a solid spiritual practice, so that when you interact with these things that are more powerful than you, let's be real, mysticism is dealing with stuff more powerful than you. You are not more powerful than the gods. I think that to say so is a little arrogant and a little egotistical. You need to have that. As well, a lot of mysticism will impact the ego. The ego is the self. A lot of people talk about this idea of ego death within spirituality as a goal. Now, I don't believe you can actually fully kill the ego. I think the ego is the self. There's no way to fully get rid of it, but you can have what are known as what I would call ego death experiences, where you have a big shatter to the ego and it makes you reorient yourself and re-understand where you are in the world. That can happen through mysticism, and those experiences are typically really hard, yet worth it. They change your whole view, but are worth it. And so that does happen, but I do want to be clear, I don't think you can actually eliminate the ego. I don't think that makes a lot of sense. I think to truly eliminate the ego, that would essentially be death of the self, and I don't think that often happens. But yeah, ego is something that comes in. You need to be willing to leave your ego at the door, so to speak, when you deal with mysticism, and think about it not necessarily in the what can this gain me, but what can we do together as the spirit. Think about the relationship and not necessarily what it gains you, which I know in the modern world can be difficult to do. We, as a culture, think a lot about like, what can this do for me, and not what can this develop, right? It's not how we think. We're very much in a mindset of what can this do for me? How can I gain from this? It's our cultural way of thinking, and breaking outside of that is going to be something that, if you really want to take mysticism extremely seriously, is going to be something that you're going to want to do, because our sort of framework of just want, gain is not necessarily going to serve you when you approach mysticism. So mysticism is everywhere, and I think mysticism is one of the best arguments for perennialism, actually, because so many people, so many traditions have had such incredible experiences. And what's interesting is a lot of these mystic techniques end up coming back to a lot of the same stuff, right? A lot of these techniques, these methods are similar, and I think it's really interesting that it all kind of comes back to that. I think that's kind of cool. So if you want to engage in mysticism, clear your mind, take care of yourself, develop some discipline, and develop some devotion. This has been the video. That's really all I want to say. Like, comment, subscribe, and if you subscribe for 93 days, you will meet your holy guardian angel, and you'll never need to know what mysticism is. And if that doesn't work, do not call a Better Business Bureau on me. I said nothing. Now, if you want to see me, I'm Georgina Rose, or .darling, on a ton of platforms. I'm here on YouTube, obviously. I also post my podcast here, The Postmodern Iconoclast, which is a commentary podcast. I'm also on Twitter, TikTok, Telegram, Instagram, Twitch. I stream once a week. And I also have a Patreon, which is how you can support me. That's how I stay afloat doing this and am able to devote the amount of time that I am. If you join my Patreon, you get extra videos every month, early access to every video. You get access to my Telegram, which is a private group chat with a bunch of my fans, and we all sort of talk about this stuff and have discussion topics. We also host a monthly reading group where essentially I will send out an essay on mysticism or the occult for people to read, and then we all have a big discussion, and it either turns into me lecturing or people discussing, and it's really fun. So if you're a high enough tier, you can do meetings with me once a month where I meet with you once a month, and we talk about your spiritual journey, your goals, and I give you advice and things to do. As well, I post ritual guides, which are over 20 pages of rituals that I've written, as well as articles about how to do this stuff. All sorts of fun stuff is in there. And yeah, I think that's all I give out on my Patreon. Oh, I also do herbalism stuff for people who want like monthly little herbal gifts sent their way. So I also do that. They're also customized. It's really fun. There's a lot going on my Patreon. It's really fun over there. And yeah, I also have a Venmo if you want to donate directly one time. It's @.darling, and I have a Ko-Fi, which will be linked below, which is another direct donation platform. So thank you so much for supporting me, and I'll see you in the next one. All right,